I'd like to welcome everyone today to our webinar from the University of Maryland Extension. Today's topic is Best Practices in Wood and Pellet Stove Incentive Programs. My name is Andrew Kling. I'm with the University of Maryland Extension, and we're going to have three speakers joining us today. My colleague Jonathan Kays from the University of Maryland Extension, John Ackerly from the Alliance for Green Heat, and Emilee van Norden from the Maryland Energy Administration. Before we get started, we've got a little bit of housekeeping to deal with so that everyone's on the same page with our webinars. And we do offer these webinars every once in a while. We invite you to join our email notification list. It's a way of keeping on top of what topics we're going to be offering. The easiest way to stay on top of that is by sending an email to listserv@listserv.umd.edu. That'll get you notifications when we have the next webinars scheduled, or you can contact me directly at akling1@umd.edu. And what usually happens with these webinars is we limit it to the first 100 people who join us that particular day. That's more a bandwidth issue than anything else, but we invite you to share this information with all sorts of people who might be interested. And if you discover that you can't stay for the entire hour today, or if you want to see this again or you want to share it with someone else, we do record the webinars. It's being recorded right now, and they'll be posted on our YouTube channel. Go to youtube.com/c/UMDFSE. And we also will have it posted on our website. That's at extension.umd.edu/Woodland. That's the Woodland Stewardship Education Program's website for the University of Maryland Extension. And there you'll find not only a list of the webinar recordings that we have, but you'll also find a publications library with information about wood energy, how to manage property that you own or property that you may manage as a state or local entity. Information about taxes, information about invasive species, information about fire. There's a wide variety of topics that we cover there. And before we get started, before I turn things over to John, just want to remind you that the program today takes about an hour. If you have any questions while we're going on, the easiest way to get a hold of us, to get our attention, is to type a question in the chat box, which is on the left side of the screen under my picture. We try to get to the questions during the presentation, but sometimes we get distracted and we get on to something else. And we have our first question, and yes, the slides from the presentation will be available. And thank you for reminding me. I meant to mention that in the last slide. What we'll do in the webinar recordings section is make a link to the YouTube video as well as these slides. They'll be available, along with a couple of other resources we have in mind. So thank you for reminding me about that. And this is how questions work. If you have a question and we don't get to it during the presentation, we'll have time at the end for a little Q&A. And if we don't get to your question, you can drop me a line and we'll connect you with the resource, or we'll answer the question directly. So before we get started, we've got a few poll questions we'd like you to answer, and these are real quick. Just go ahead and let us know what you think about each of these topics. There's 5 or 6 of them, and once they come up on the screen here. The first one is we'd ask you to tell us why you're interested in this topic. Does your state have an incentive program? Does your organization provide educational information for wood or pellet stove consumers? What region do you live in? And you can see the results as they come up, which is always fun to see. And then how many miles would you have to travel to your county extension office if you wanted to view this presentation? Some folks have county extension offices nearby, others not so much, especially if you're from Canada. We have some folks from Canada who had registered, so they may be listening in. So we invite you to to fill these out real quick, and we'll wait to see once the numbers have stopped. We'll close the polls and keep moving. Okay, thank you for giving us that feedback, and you'll be able to see these if you view the recording. So what I'm going to do for a second here is mute my microphone and turn the headset over to Jonathan. Let me bring up his slides and his photograph. Hello, Jonathan. There you are. Okay. And here's Jonathan.
Welcome. My name is Jonathan Case. I'm an extension specialist, natural resources with the University of Maryland. I'm just going to give a little bit of background, I think, that will help in terms of for the other speakers that come on after me. A couple of the things I just want to talk about briefly, things that should be considerations for some wood incentive programs, is just a little bit about wood and pellet stoves, why they're increasing, environmental issues, and some key educational issues as well. First of all, wood is the fastest growing fuel, residential heat fuel that's out there. A lot of citizens have figured this out. You look at across the states in general, there's been a large increase in the use of residential heat fuel, and Maryland as well, about 33%, but many other states are quite a bit higher. And when you talk about wood as a renewable energy resource, that's actually wood is basically the largest consumer, producer of residential renewable energy across the country, accounting for about 75% or so of the renewable energy in residential homes, far ahead of solar and geothermal. And so obviously this is something with so many people using it and so many others wanting to use it. It's something we have to, if you're going to incentivize it, want to of course make it so that it's the lowest emissions and the best technology that's available. But this is something that is obviously growing in our citizenry. In terms of wood compared to other types of fuels, in regards to replacing fossil fuels, which is a big of interest of folks, fossil fuel reduction of a wood pellet stove for about $2,000 is equal to that of basically a similar solar PV array that can cost as much as $20,000. So both systems can displace equal amounts of carbon from fossil fuels, but the difference is quite striking. Basically, most families can afford a wood and pellet stove. Most families cannot afford a $20,000 solar array or even geothermal in many cases. So in essence, wood is the renewable energy for the masses, and it's something within the reach of most people. Environmentally, the thing I think we need to be concerned about, obviously, is how the goal of programs to incentivize low-emission stoves, and many of the problems that have arisen across the country. There's folks here on the Pacific Northwest and elsewhere where a lot of valleys from inversions and so on, that a lot of smoke, a lot of particulates. We want to go from this basically to this, and that requires using the best technology that's available. And I know that John Ackerly with the Alliance for Green Heat have had a number of competitions and so on to kind of improve the wood technology such that it takes more automated and less relying on the user to use it properly. The problem basically is that most of the wood heating equipment that's out there is outdated. And you can see here over on the right, and I realize now this is actually an older slide set that we put in here, but the real problem here is that most of the wood that's out there is outdated. Old wood stoves prior to 1988, and you can see they make up about 60% of the stoves that are out there, with emissions levels that are probably around 25 grams of particulates per hour. Much higher than EPA certified stoves, which make up about maybe 35–40% of the stoves, but are limited, at least by present rules, to no more than 7.5 grams of emissions per hour. So the question is, should the goal of most of these incentive programs should be not only encouraging people to use wood energy, but also those with older stoves being able to switch out to the newer technology, which is going to be environmentally much lower levels of emissions. Oh, no, there it is. Okay, there's the two things. I thought that didn't come up. And we know that after 1988, EPA started to certify stoves, and they couldn't have any more than 7.5 grams. Washington State now has a lower limit than that, and everybody knows that probably EPA is going to be mandating much lower emissions over the next few years. The thing to remember here, it's not just about environmental issues, which are very, very important in terms of lower emissions, but one way that I think the consumer, and having done a number of workshops, this appeals to a lot of people. If we have higher efficiency equipment, what does it result in lower emissions, but it also results in a savings for the consumer. And I think that's something that resonates with people. And just to give you an example of this, this is a couple of comparisons of wood stove technology out there and its effective efficiency on cost. So if you have a fireplace that's 10% efficient, we can, the basic equal value we use to compare different systems is the cost per million BTUs. So using a cord of wood, the cost would be about $59 per million BTUs. One of the older EPA wood stoves, which maybe is 40% efficient, the cost would be about $14.7 per million BTUs. However, even one of the ones that are post-1998, and let's say around 70% efficient, the cost goes way down to about $8.5 per million BTUs. So, and I will do workshops, and many people will say, well, you know, I have all the wood I need out back. The fact is, whether you buy wood or you cut it yourself, there are large efficiency savings not only results in lower environmental emissions, but results in significant, you know, economic savings for the users. So that's I think a big selling point for this as well, even for people that may have, you know, even some of the newer stoves. The cost of post-pellet stoves, probably around, you know, $1,500 to $3,000, as well as, you know, wood and pellet stoves are in that range. Of course, the big difference with wood stoves is that for somebody who wants to switch over to this technology, you have to have a decent chimney. And we know that with pellets, and having done a number of workshops, again, the thing that really appeals to a lot of people with pellets is that you really don't need a high temperature chimney. Much of that can be done through a little pipe, you know, 3.5, 4-inch pipe out through any wall. So there's considerable savings in installation cost. And I think the thing that's real inviting to folks is that wooden pellet stoves may require upfront investment of maybe a few $1,000s, but in many cases, if they're heating with oil and or propane and things like that, there's going to be a significant amount of savings and maybe a 3 to 5 year payback. And that's something that most people can deal with. In terms of fuel cost itself, ignore what's in the red triangle there, but if we can kind of compare fuels based on this metric of fuel cost per million BTUs. And I have a couple of the main types of fuels that are here. So looking at firewood, assuming you're going to pay $200 a cord and that the efficiency of your stove is maybe 63%, that's a fuel cost of $12.99 per million BTUs. Now we can contrast that with natural gas, which again is very cheap. So for folks that have natural gas, maybe going to wood is not real attractive. But pellet stoves, again, are a bit more because you have to buy the pellets. But when you start comparing it to the other fossil fuels, if you have, you know, fuel oil, propane, or electric heat, the savings per million BTUs can be significant. And the thing to remember here is this last column here you see fuel cost per heating season. I'm just using a value of saying it takes 80 million BTUs to heat a house during the wintertime. You have to be comparable with cautious when comparing like wood and pellets with other types of whole house heating systems. So for example, to get 80 million BTUs of firewood out of firewood would be about over $1,000, pellets $1,600, and significantly more for the other fossil fuels. The thing is, though, that with most wood heaters, you're not heating the whole house. You know, you're only heating a portion of the area where the stove is and part of the house. So those values are, there's a lot less wood that's actually used. And of course, there's a lot of savings overall because instead of heating the whole house, you're just heating that portion where most people are and then using maybe supplemental heating to heat the rest. So that's something to keep in mind and something that appeals to people as well. Another issue that's come up about firewood, especially, and maybe pellets as well, is that, well, perhaps we should be encouraging people to use sustainably produced firewood. And I would just suggest that's kind of a misguided question. Most wood, much of the wood that comes out of there, goes to consumers, comes from tree service companies. Some comes from forest harvest. But the point is that there's really no meaningful designation for sustainability for firewood. I mean, it's just not there. Certainly from tree service companies, there are certification systems for woodland owners and things like that, but they're really just not appropriate for firewood, and they're not very common. Now, some things are changing with regards to that, but I would just suggest this idea of sustainably produced firewood in most cases, it's not going to be really something that's going to be easily to ascertain for most sources of firewood. The other thing I will mention is that it's kind of forgotten is that another benefit of encouraging the use of wood resources, whether wood or pellets, is that not only can it reduce energy consumption. In our area, we have a lot of heat pumps. It's also a local fuel. It provides energy security. And this is strengthening the local economy as well, because every time a dollar spent is not sent to a multinational oil company or something like that, basically that's money that stays in the community. So it's important to understand that each link in the wood supply chain retains and creates local green jobs. So that's a good thing, like you see right here. It's kind of captured economic development that many times is lost. So all those dollars spent on there's firewood, or probably regionally more with regards to pellets, that's wood that stays in those economies instead of going out of the country to multinational corporations in many cases. And one study that was done in Maine found that for every dollar spent on fuel oil for heating, only 15% or 15 cents remains in the local economy. The biomass studies, the woody biomass studies, indicate that for the woody biomass systems, that's more like 60, 70, maybe even 80% of that money is actually staying in the community. So it's a positive benefit. In terms of educational challenges, I would say, and having done a lot of education with landowners and suppliers as well, the biggest problem is people just don't know what seasoned wood is. It's totally misunderstood by users and retailers and firewood suppliers. Wood should be 20% moisture throughout to burn most efficiently and get the lower level emissions. But most people have no idea what that means, and the idea has been put up forth on some of these incentive programs to maybe encourage the use of or hand out like wood moisture meters. And I think that's just a great idea. When I show firewood dealers this and stuff, they've never seen anything like that. And they think that just if wood's been cut, it's seasoned. And there are other questions out there about how to purchase seasoned firewood and how to get quality pellets and stuff about chimneys. But this whole idea of seasoned woods, especially as it relates to lowering emissions, I think is the most misunderstood thing. And because most wood takes 6 to 9 months to split, after it's split to be basically seasoned. And wetter wood provides, like I said, fewer BTUs, but also provides higher emissions, which we don't want. So how to store it properly is a big issue. And I'll just give you an example from a little study we did here at the University of Maryland. I took some hickory trees. We split some of them, cut and split some of them and put them on a pallet. Some others that we just put into rounds and put on a pallet. After 1 year, the split samples, the ones that had been split previously, were 20% moisture, and those unsplit rounds, when we split them, were still at 30 to 35% moisture. So this idea of making sure wood is split to advance, quicken seasoning is very important. So that's a big educational issue, I think. In terms of the Maryland program, there's another number of partners involved, and I think every state will have its own partners, but also may want to encourage the use of involving big box stores, and that's probably something that really hasn't been addressed in some of these programs. So we have a number of fact sheets out there for our program that can be used for the educational side that are listed here. I think we also need, for example, a couple of videos, simple videos on proper seasoning of wood and some of those issues as well, and how to use a moisture meter, I think would be very useful. These are things that can be included with information that's provided when people are given the incentive dollars. Basically, that's what I have, and I'm going to move on, I think, to our next speaker. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. I'm going to invite John Ackerly to join us now. And John, are you there?
Yes, I'm
here. Okay, John, take it away. You should have control of the mouse, and go ahead and talk to the folks.
Thanks very much, Andrew and Jonathan, for hosting this. I also want to say I think it may have been my fault technologically that their first attempt at this 2 weeks ago didn't happen. I was at a law firm, and they may have had a firewall that prevented me from using this software. So my apologies for that. I'm glad to see a lot of people are on this time. Yeah, so I founded this group, Alliance for Green Heat, 5 years ago. And we're mainly a consumer group. We really are trying to help consumers use wood heat better and be a voice for wood heat consumers at the state and federal level. We're working for more incentives, and we also are working to promote cleaner technology by hosting technology competitions. And we've hosted 2 of them now here and in New York, and hope to do a 3rd one next year. Small staff, myself, Melissa Voldman, and Morale are the 3 kind of long-time people, and then we have periodic research fellows. Okay, so I'm going to go through 14 best practices. Hopefully I'll be able to make through them all. And I want to say in the beginning that having more of these 14 does not necessarily make the program better, because simple programs are important. You don't want to load it down with too many complications, both for program managers, for retailers, and for consumers. And some of the trends that we're going to talk about, which some people consider best practice, we don't even agree with. So we want to talk about those as well, because there's a lot of things that sound like they may be good or easy, and when it comes to implementing them, they're quite difficult. And I also want to say that there's a lot of overlap between what I'm going to talk about today and change-out programs, but we're really focusing here on incentive programs where old stoves don't have to be traded in to get the incentive for a new stove. But there's plenty of overlap, and we can learn a lot from those programs. Okay, the very first best practice is requiring certified equipment. I'm going to let's go by that quickly because it's not much of an issue. And as of next year, all pellet stoves will be certified, so that's not going to be an issue as of next year. Okay, stricter emission limits. This is one of the key aspects of a lot of incentive programs, and we definitely consider it a best practice. And I think especially in the area of pellet stoves, where the tested efficiency is very similar to the real-world efficiency, it's important to just get cleaner appliances out there when possible. And a gram of particulates is a lot of particulates. And so each gram that you can reduce is important for the family that's living in the house and for the neighbors. And so we really think near pellet stoves, it's worth it to have, a limit of 2.5 grams an hour. Wood stoves, we also think it can be worthwhile. It's not as worthwhile because so much is dependent on the operator. But basically what the grams per hour of a wood stove indicate is what its optimum is. So if a operator is burning optimally, a 1 gram an hour wood stove can be a lot cleaner than a 4 gram an hour wood stove. As I said, there's so many variables there. Okay, efficiency. This, I think, is going to be the area that we're going to be facing most in the next couple of years. So far, there are not enough third-party verified efficiency numbers out there to really use efficiency as an eligibility criteria. And I do want to, just for a moment, mention, probably everyone on this call knows that the $300 federal tax credit is being extended this year. The Senate voted on it 2 days ago. And there's a 75% efficiency requirement in there. And it's confusing for a lot of people because that requirement does not really distinguish between higher and lower stoves. Industry has used a loophole to ensure that pretty much every single stove was able to claim that 75% efficiency. And it's really very confusing for consumers and also very misleading. And we're particularly concerned with pellet stoves because there are some very low efficiency pellet stoves out there. And these can saddle consumers with much higher pellet fuel costs for many years to come. And we'd like to see more agencies warn consumers not to, put any stock in a manufacturer's self-certification saying that the stove is greater than 75% efficiency. And it's particularly impossible to use that to compare savings with your fossil fuel equipment, because it's also a LHV number, not a HHV one. Anyway, so the only state so far has been Oregon that's been able to successfully integrate efficiency. And it's a little complicated how they've done it, but there are about 24 stoves that do have tested efficiencies, and if you buy one of those, you'll get a much bigger tax credit than if you don't. And there's also an obscure program in Colorado that says you can upgrade to a more efficient appliance. So you can upgrade from a non-cat to a pellet, or from a pellet to a cat stove. We don't think it's necessarily the best thought-through program, but I just wanted to point it out that there has been some experimentation with that in some local areas. Okay, rebate amounts. So right-sizing the rebate is important because you want to maximize the benefits of tax dollars. And Maryland, they use $500 for wood, $700 for pellets for an incentive program. I think that's a good level. I also think bounty programs are really very cost-efficient ways of getting older stoves out of the airshed. So having an ongoing bounty program of $200 to $400, which could be done in conjunction with a straight incentive program, can be very effective. And one thing in Maryland that we were very impressed with is, even though there's no requirement to turn in an old stove, but half the people get rid of their old stove anyway. So it has been relatively effective at getting a lot of old stoves out of the circulation. Professional installation. Now this is an area where this is far easier said than done. Of course, all incentive programs should require professional installation and change-out programs for obvious reasons, but how it's done varies, and I don't have any real good answer for the ideal way to do it, but we do think that recommending CSIA and NFI certified installers is important. It's a Chimney Safety Institute of America and the National Fireplace Institute are the two agencies that do certify people on installation. Maine's incentive program requires contractors to do it. New York requires Energy Star professionals. Maryland has accepted self-installs, and Emilee, who's speaking next, may be able to indicate if that's going to continue or not. But as long as the install is later inspected and approved. So these are all different ways of approaching this. I think in the future there may be some, maybe they'll be required they have to be a general contractor or have a contractor's license and be CSIA or NFI or something like that. So low-income considerations, again, we think this is an important best practice, and providing a higher rebate level for low-income people would be ideal. In New York, it's really interesting. What they do is if you're not low income, you have to turn in an old wood stove to get the rebate for a pellet stove. But if for low income people, any low income person can get the rebate for a pellet stove. So we think that's a wonderful workaround of dealing with emissions, but also deploying more very clean pellet stoves in areas where people really need affordable heat. And in New York, as in Maryland, they only give the rebate or the tax credit if you don't have access to natural gas. So this is also a way of keeping it in rural areas. Okay, minimizing free riders. So free riders are people who get the rebate or the tax credit but would have made the purchase anyway. And every single incentive program deals with this. Energy Star programs all over the country are always trying to figure out how you can minimize this. You know, the idea of an incentive is it's supposed to help people get a higher efficiency appliance that typically will cost more. So you want to help consumers with that little extra bit of money they may need to get a device that will save them money in the long run. Now, in the case of wood stoves, if people come into a retailer and they don't even know about the program until you get there, you're going to have higher free riders. Sometimes, it can make the purchase when they find out about the incentive program. But other times it doesn't. I just made a quick calculation, and when the federal government extended the $300 tax credit, they did so retroactively. So what happened? It's only good until the end of this year, to the end December 31st of this year. So retroactively, there may be up to 300,000 people who are going to get a tax credit who didn't realize that they were going to get it at the time of purchase. So it provided no motivation for them. And that'll cost the federal government about $90 million in taxpayer dollars to give that $300 tax credit to everyone who bought a stove this year. And it's not, it's not necessarily the worst thing to help subsidize those stoves, but we feel that they should only be subsidizing stoves that are cleaner and more efficient. And of course, with a federal tax credit, there's no professional installation required. So a tax credit could be going to someone installing a 5 gram an hour stove in an urban area who could be self-installing a 5 gram an hour stove in an urban area, which is not ideal. Okay, household area eligibility. I mentioned this briefly before about how some programs now, like in Maryland and New York, are only allowing the rebate to go to people who don't have access to natural gas, which means mostly rural areas, or possibly only in rural areas. We think this is particularly important with wood stoves, less so with pellet stoves, but wood stoves are not an ideal energy source in densely populated areas. So there are various ways of limiting incentives to rural areas, and access to gas is one of them. And the other way is just to limit the entire program to pellet stoves and not address wood stoves at all, because wood stoves still, no matter what numbers you're getting in the lab, it could easily be up to half the people who have wood stoves are not operating them optimally. Energy audits. This is something my organization has put a lot of effort in trying to get wood stoves included in energy audits, so that whenever a home has an energy audit, the auditor will inspect the stove for clearances, inspect some basic safety aspects of the stove, and recommend to the homeowner, particularly if they have a really old uncertified stove, that they upgrade it and show them some numbers to show them how much they could be saving. Ideally, we'd also like an energy auditor to take a look at the woodshed, or however and wherever the wood is installed, and use a moisture meter on it, and also make recommendations to the homeowner about the fuel they're using. But this is something that seems obvious, especially for the very northernmost parts of our country, where half the homes have wood stoves. But up until now, there's been no requirement in any major energy audit program for the auditor to inspect a wood stove. So for the first time, BPI is including energy audit guidelines, but they may be voluntary, which is a huge disappointment to us, that the auditor will not be required to look at the wood stove as they are all other HVAC equipment, but will only do it if the homeowner requests it, or if they want to do it or feel it's important. This is still in the comment period, and we would urge, if there are states out there who feel strongly about this, we would urge them to contact BPI and urge BPI to make this a requirement for homes that use wood stoves as the primary heating source. Okay, dedicated outside air. Now, this is a best practice that we don't necessarily think should be. dedicated outside air can be really good in very tight homes, but it's not necessarily, most hearth professionals do not recommend it, partially because dedicated outside air systems don't always work well, and there's a chance that the tube that's supposed to bring in clean outside air reverses, and you get outside air coming down the chimney and the smoke going out the outside air tube. But also homes are most homes, 90% of homes in America are so leaky that the amount of air that is drawn up the stack for, especially for a EPA certified stove, is not that great, and it's not necessarily important to have dedicated outside air. This is something I think that may be changing as houses get tighter, and if the stoves can use the dedicated outside air better, because a lot of stoves aren't really designed to use outside air very well, and would be taking air from the room anyway. Okay, education. This is, of course, important, and it's, again, it's one of those things that's a lot harder to do than you'd think. How you really get information in people's hands in the course of an incentive program in a way that that impacts them. So I think there's some work that could be done even to get someone to sign something, read something and sign it saying that they will use seasoned wood, for example, that they will give their stove enough air to try to make a bigger impact on the person, other than just handing them a sheet of paper or having information on a website. So education is really one of the most difficult things, and there's an old joke saying that the hardest person to educate is the 60-year-old male who has been heating with wood for the last 30 years, and they think they've been doing it a certain way, and they think they're doing it right, and to get to change those habits is actually a huge challenge. So I think there's a lot more work that needs to go in this area to figure out how we can really educate people in ways that leads to changed behavior. Okay, partners and outreach. A best practice is definitely to create good partners and get their input before, during, and after a program. Providing moisture meters, Jonathan mentioned this, and also providing an incentive for woodsheds, or even saying you only get a rebate or tax credit if you have a woodshed. If there's very little money and you have to really choose between people. And these are things that could be considered, especially in smaller areas. It's hard. This is the sort of thing that's very hard to do statewide. But there needs to be more focus on the storage of wood. And there are even people who say incentivizing woodshed would be a lot more effective to reduce emissions than incentivizing an EPA stove. Okay, monitoring and evaluation. We'd like to see a lot more of that in these programs. Keeping track of who gets the rebate or tax incentive and trying to send them an email to get some basic data from them, I think is very feasible and could be done more. And that's it. So we do have a full report on this, and I think Andrew is going to send an email afterwards with a link to it. It's a 20-page report about best practices in incentive programs, and it has lots more detail. So thanks very much. I also want to particularly thank a bunch of people who I see are on this call who have been some of the pioneers in working with these best practices, trying them out for size and seeing how well they work and giving us feedback so that we can all learn more from them. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, John. And as he said, the report will be available. That'll be up on our website along with the the link to the recording and the presentations for the slides. So now what I'd like to do is bring in Emilee Van Norden from the Maryland Energy Administration. She's got a few thoughts about Maryland's program. And Emilee, are you there? Okay, I don't hear Emilee at the moment. Okay, hang on just a moment, please. Okay, it sounds like Emilee's going to be with us in just a minute. In the meantime, I want to remind you that the information here will be available on our website, hopefully next week. I do have some time to put all of this together, get the recording taken care of, get rid of some of the dead air that we might have, and take care of the little nuts and bolts so that when you share it with someone who's not able to join us today, it sounds a lot more streamlined.
Hi, Andrew, can you hear me?
Oh. Yes, Emilee, there you are.
Sorry
Wonderful. No problem. Go ahead. Take it away.
Okay. Hi. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining the webinar. My presentation shouldn't take more than 15 minutes, so hopefully we'll have a few minutes to talk about questions. I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm the Biomass Program Manager at the Maryland Energy Administration. I run a few other programs I wanted to mention. I also work with our community windswept program and a program that is designed to help streamline the costs and the time it takes to permit solar. And those are sort of things I'm able to do on the side, but this is my primary program that I look at. So I wanted to give you guys a quick background about where the Wood Stove Grant Program got its start. It actually started before I got here, which I've only been here for about a year now. So I know the history of it, though, which is that working with Jonathan Kays and the UMD Extension Group, as well as the Alliance for Green Heat with John Ackerly, who we just heard from, in the wood and pellet stove industry, my agency, Maryland Energy Administration, began learning about the wood and pellet stove industry and the technology's benefits. So even though I wasn't here in the early phases, I know that a lot of work went on part of the Alliance and the UMD Extension and MEA, and also on part of the industry and stakeholders. So I suspect if you don't have a wood program, a wood or pellet stove program in your state, I would encourage that kind of partnership because it's certainly been helpful here. Out of all of that work, a Wood Energy Coalition was formed, and I believe that it's Jonathan Kays actually who is the primary organizer of that group. And in 2012, we launched a pilot clean burning wood stove grant program. Originally, the General Assembly in Maryland considered creating a wood stove fund, and I don't think that passed, but despite that, it was decided that we were able to implement a program using existing Clean Energy Grant Program funds. So the funds for this program come from the same pot that we also give out grants for solar or wind or geo. Now, originally in 2012, we weren't sure whether there was sufficient demand to warrant the program, but the demand actually turned out to exceed our expectations. I know initially they put $50,000 aside for the program, and we weren't even sure if it would get used, but not long after the program was launched, we went through that money and kept the program alive. We also modified the program shortly thereafter, and we changed it. Originally, it was $400 for wood stoves and $500 for pellet stoves, and as John had mentioned, now it's $600 for wood stoves. And no, I think it's $500 for wood stove, sorry, and $700 for pellet. We also decided to extend the program indefinitely, so it's been going on since that time, and it just rolls over every year, so it's not something that we have to re-announce, and we haven't really made any huge changes to it actually since its inception. The increase in the grant funding we hoped would encourage an uptake of the technology, and we were hoping that we'd see an uptake in lower median income areas, and ultimately that's one of the primary goals of the program. We're tasked with helping residents obtain cleaner, cheaper, more reliable and efficient energy, and as has been mentioned before, this is a great way to do it for people who aren't otherwise going to be able to afford solar or geo. So one thing I wanted to mention is that in many people's minds, clean energy often means solar or wind or geo, but clean burning wood and pellet stoves are also clean technologies. And I think this again touches on the education piece that John talked about, which is that not everybody realizes how clean this technology can be and how accessible it is, especially if it's done correctly. Again, something that I really like about this program is that it's accessible to residents with a wide range of incomes. It gives us an opportunity to serve residents who wouldn't otherwise be served, and I think that's why the uptake went so well. So if I break it out for you by year, in the first year, although this wasn't a full fiscal year, and I'm talking in fiscal years here, we had 81 applications. In fiscal year 2013, so that was a full fiscal year, we had 82 applications, so about the same. But then in 2014, we had 625 applications. And already in fiscal year 2015, which started in June, we've had 274. So since the program's inception, this was up until December 1st, we've had over 1,000 applications put into us. And I think that shows that it just took a little bit of time for information to get out there. But since it has been, it's really been a success. In order to make the program a success, however, we had to implement a few best practices. These were heavily influenced, honestly, by John and Jonathan, and we really appreciate their input. So this whole slide is really just designated for these two lists that we think are really important for your best practice. So first and foremost, the applicant has to install an eligible stove, which is laid out on our website, also on the application. We have a number of guidelines and requirements for the grant program, but there are two critical requirements, which is that it be listed on the appropriate list, which is the EPA's list of certified stoves for wood stoves and the Washington Standards list for pellet stoves. And then secondly, which is highlighted in green, it has to meet our emissions limits. And this is a really important piece of the puzzle, and it's a piece that often gets missed. So the list for us, what we did was we put the EPA list and the Washington list both on our program website. The links are live, so as the lists get updated, I guess on the EPA site, for instance, they're automatically directed to the updated lists from our website. So I'd say that this is a critical best practice for any wood stove program. It's just not good enough to encourage people to use wood stoves because they're becoming cleaner and more efficient every day. We really want to encourage use of those types of stoves. And as John mentioned, there's talk of requiring stove manufacturers to include energy efficiency ratings on their stoves now too. So this is something we're keeping an eye on. It's important for us to stay on top of this, and we're aware of the potential, and we are certainly considering if and how to incorporate those efficiency requirements into our program. In addition to the first two requirements for both wood and pellet, we have several other critical requirements, and we also consider these best practices. So these have basically already been touched on. It has to displace electric or non-natural gas. The property has to be a primary Maryland residence. This comes into play a lot, actually, because we'll look it up and find out that somebody owns actually 2 houses and this is a vacation home. We don't want to give out a lot of grants to people who are only going to be there part of the time, or give them multiple grants even. We recommend that the stoves are installed by NFI certified contractors. And we also require all the permits and inspections that are required by local jurisdictions to be submitted, or at least a picture of those permits to be submitted along with the application package. This is my last slide, so I'll try to make it brief, but there's actually a lot to discuss here. So although it seems straightforward, there is sometimes confusion about whether a stove is actually eligible for a grant. I get a lot of calls from people and I have to walk them through this process. It's because people don't always know their stove's make or model. They don't know if it's an insert or a freestanding stove. They see the list, which it includes stoves that emit more particulate matter than would be allowed under a grant program, and so they see it on the list, they see their stove on the list, and they think they qualify, and this is simply not the case in a lot of times. So awareness of the particulate matter requirement has been especially difficult. We go out of our way to highlight it by providing it in multiple locations on the website and on our application, but there's still situations where a customer purchases an ineligible stove, actually gets it installed, and then claims she or he didn't realize that it needed to meet those particulate matter limits. This is a case, I think, of either they needed to do more research, or whoever they bought it from hopefully could next time be able to inform their customer which stoves are eligible or not. So we also have the requirement that the stove be used to displace fossil fuel sources of heat. We don't have a compliance mechanism for this, although we're not really worried about it, because I just don't think if you do have access to natural gas, you're going to be willing to go out and make the purchase of a wood or pellet stove. The bullet about NFI certified contractors, one, it's only suggested. We also, if you do a self-install and it passes inspection, we'll still give out the grant. It's possible that that could change in the future. I would say this fiscal year it's not going to. It's probably up to the individual state, but our feeling is that right now we just want to encourage getting them out there. If it passes inspection, we assume that's good enough. But we'd also like to probably recommend NFI or CSIA certification for installation as well. I'm certainly open to changing this or making that a more strict standard. Just haven't gotten there yet. So with all of these issues that I just spoke about, again, education is really important. I think that Jonathan, and I have had a lot of talks lately, and it's very evident that the best people to educate are going to be your wood stove dealers, including the big box retailers, to let them know these sorts of requirements, that the issue just doesn't come down to the individual consumer, because it's very possible that the consumer isn't going to become educated on this. So I wanted to add one last thing, which is that Suzanne Turner from Survival Products in Maryland gave me a few points I wanted to share with the group. So she wanted to stress the importance of participating dealers to actively promote the program in their region. I can definitely speak to this. I would say that if you look at a map of our state, the most densely areas where we have the most stoves, it correlates exactly with where we have very active dealers. She also noticed, and I've noticed as well, that some retailers don't even mention the program when people are in their stores. This is just a lack of education, and a lack of, I don't know if they just don't know about it, or if they don't want to talk about it, they don't want to be bothered with it, but this is something that I think the state, and in my case, that I need to address. And then the last point that she wanted me to make is that she's in favor of teaching dealers to do the paperwork for their customers, because I know that she does it for her customers. I'm absolutely in favor of this as well, and a good example of this is that the solar industry, they do this sort of work for their customers. It's just a turnkey operation, and I really think that that's how it needs to be for wood stoves as well. It's really going to guarantee more quality applications and more applications that actually get accepted. This brings me to my last point, which I could talk about for a very long time, but I won't, which is permits. This is a case also where a dealer or an installer is going to be much more versed in whether a permit is required. If you look at the picture on the slide, this is actually a list showing whether a county in Maryland requires a permit or an inspection or both, and under what circumstances. The fact is it's different in every county, and if I call one county sometimes and then call them back a few hours later, they'll give me different guidance. So this has been a real big issue. We're working through it with counties. We usually have to push through to the top and just make them realize that this is an issue, that it's getting more important, and that these are getting more popular, and that they need to firmly come down with a decision on whether they're going to require permits or inspections. And that's just kind of the only way through that, I think, is probably at state level to talk to individual jurisdictions and for everybody to get on the same page, because otherwise we're getting applications in that say, no, we talked to the county, and they say we don't need an inspection, and then I'll call, and the county actually says that they do. So this is just an issue that's ongoing, but we're working on it, and I would suggest that if you're going to implement a program in your state, you probably start working on it now. So that is the end of my talk, and hopefully we have a few minutes left over for questions. Thanks.
Well, thanks, Emilee. You may have noticed there were a couple of questions there in the chat box, and if you want to stay with us, Emilee, and bring your microphone back on, you may want to address these directly, or you can talk to the folks through the chat box. That's up to you. Larry wanted to know, are Maryland's inspectors trained in the installation of stoves? And Brian says, I'm a little confused about why there's a need for NFI or CSI certified installers. Is it just for safety, making sure the house won't burn down? If that's the case, I'd assume the permit inspection would suffice. So if you...
I think the answer to the first question is, I'm pretty sure the answer is no. I'm not positive though. So maybe John or Jonathan knows that. The second question, the problem there is that not all jurisdictions require an inspection or a permit. So we were hoping to kind of capture that. And so yes, it is about safety.
Okay.
Yeah, this is John. I just say, yeah, a lot of there are a lot of situations that are straightforward where a contractor can just follow the installation guidelines and do a fine job. But once you get into you know, troubleshooting just strange and odd problems, the NFI or CSIA guys will have so much experience, because if you've done 100 of these installations before versus if you've only done 2 of them, regardless of your certification, that just makes a big difference. And a lot of these NFI and CSIA guys, they've been doing these for 20 or 30 years, so they've seen every single different variation of problems and know how to, are much more likely to know how to respond to them well.
And Rose has a question as well. What about outdoor wood boilers? And I know that that's a completely different kettle of fish. I'm by no means an expert in any of this, but in just a little bit of time I've been here with the University of Maryland Extension, that's a completely different arena of concern for some folks. And I know Jonathan can address that at another time. But while we're getting down towards the end of the hour, I want to get some feedback on folks before we tie things up. Just a few poll questions to go ahead and give us some feedback about what we've done today. That didn't work. So anyway, let me thank everyone for coming today. Yeah, for some reason the final poll questions didn't show up. So since we're just about out of time, let me thank everyone for coming today, and once again remind everyone that the recording will be available hopefully next week before the new year shows up. And if you have any questions, drop us a line, and I can get a hold of Emilee or Jonathan or John, and we can go from there. So I'd like to thank you for your patience and joining us today. If you started to join us 2 weeks ago and encountered all the technical difficulties, I want to thank you for joining us again. And once again, we'll be letting everyone know where the recording is. And enjoy the rest of your day. Happy holidays and Happy New Year.